Hello, the webinar is on and I'm welcoming everybody who made it, and I thank everybody for registering and signing up for this. It's a roundtable which is hosted by ECLF and CFFO, and it's about the agility challenge, which is a challenge I guess quite a few of you are very familiar with, and which has been really, in the books for quite a while. I'm super excited to be joined by three people who have a lot to say to this, I assume. They come both from semi-academia, even Peter, right? You did a PhD recently, but your main thing, Peter Cavanaugh, is being in business, being with General Electric as the business ecosystem transformation leader, and formerly also with Crotonville. And I'm glad you're here, and we're going to hear, I hope, a lot about the agile challenges GE faces and how you do. Then we have Michael Arena, who would say semi as well. You know, you've been for quite a few years with General Motors and were involved in the transformation there, which resulted in a book called Adaptive Space, which will also hopefully be at the center of our conversations a little bit about that space that happens between the formal and the informal that eventually informs really true change. And thank you for being here. You're now with Amazon Web Services, and we'll see if they are agile or not. We'll see. But glad you're here. And then, of course, Darrell Rigby, whom I recently met. He had a major piece in Harvard Business Review about true agile, or to say how you make agile really work. And it is also a book that just came out by you. And Darrell is a veteran with Bain and Company. I think you've been with the firm for 42 or some years. So that's quite amazing. Equally, Peter, by the way, being with GE quit since 1986. Yeah, my name is Roland Deiser. I founded quite a while ago, maybe 20 years ago, a consortium of about 50 or so global corporations called the Executive Corporate Learning Forum, where we talk among senior executives about the challenges of capability building in disruptive and turbulent times. And I, at the same time, also run the Center for the Future of Organization at the Drucker School of Management, which is a kind of a sandbox for me, a little think tank where we think how do organizations configure themselves for the future. And it's called For the Organization, not organizations, because organizing is something that goes these days beyond the boundaries of a individual organization. So we're looking really at also ecosystems recently and stuff like that. So that was just a quick introduction of our friends here. And then maybe just a couple of words. Why did we choose agility? We have that consortium of corporations, and agility ranked very high on their interests since quite a while. And as so many of those terms, like digital transformation or ecosystems, is also a buzzword, of course. Everybody's agile. What is it even, right? When we did a study on digital transformation, we found out that agility is one of the biggest things really to look at, but it has very many dimensions. It has individual dimensions, how is the mindset, how do people deal with that? And maybe we get on this a little bit. It has dimensions how you make with teams and collaboration architectures, and it also structural aspects, I guess. So maybe we'll take that as well. How do you design an architecture that includes different ways to actually organize and have processes done and things like that. So without further ado, let's start. And yeah, welcome again to all the participants. Later in the session, you might have the chance, the ECLF members, to jump onto an empty chair. We'll see who is on the audience here. But for now, let's engage in the conversation. And why don't we start with practice? I thought, Peter, is GE agile, and how do you deal with agility? What does it mean to you?
So it's a great question, Roland. I think one of the things from a GE perspective is we're a large company, right? We have a lot of different businesses. We have a lot of different experiences that people have. I think the key focus of agility is thinking about the customer and saying, how are we creating the value for the customer? And as we execute on that, we look to be more agile. We look in our software business to be an agile software developer. and kind of replicate that in different places. But I wouldn't say that we're an agile company. I think our perspective would be we want to drive resilience for the employees. We want to drive a good customer focus, and then a structure or some kind of management structure for the overall operating characteristics of the company. And right now, our new CEO is driving a lean company, lean strategy. And I guess what I would say is that I look at, there's a lot of similarities between the tenets of lean and driving an agile organization. And so I don't look at it as like it's this or that as being completely different, but I said like it's a different slice of the same coin for how you generate energy, how you drive a really profound process that is customer focused, that allows the innovation, as the other panelists will say, is how to drive the innovation, not just at the operating level in the business, but actually at the senior level in the business. And so I think those are where it becomes very consistent between lean and agile.
You're nodding, Darrell, when you hear even in the upper echelons of the organization. That was what you're looking for, right?
Yeah, he certainly caught my ear with that comment, because I agree wholeheartedly. I also agree that lean and agile are cousins. I think they do have a lot in common with focus on the customer and continuous improvement. And I think unless the senior executives really believe in these concepts, if they just become some sort of a slogan, a fad of the month, it's not going to do any good. But if this becomes something that the senior leaders truly believe and are willing to stick to for 3 to 5 years, at least, to say, this is something that I honestly believe in, I want to see drive through our organization. Without that, it's likely to become one of the next fads that gets thrown on the junk heap of management manias, and heaven knows there are plenty of those sitting out there. So I think one interesting difference sometimes between lean and agile is that agile believes you have to both run the business efficiently and reliably, and you have to change the business rapidly and effectively. And I think sometimes in operations, and sometimes lean, when it's not done correctly, focuses on minimizing variability. And that's good. It improves efficiency. But agile sort of needs parts of the organization to be increasing variability through experimentation and testing and learning. And I think it's the balance of those two concepts, the balance of lean, efficient operations and agile changing, that makes success. I think you need both of those inside the organization.
Yeah, absolutely. I hope we didn't lose Michael and his problems, but we'll see, right? But that's fine. Maybe, until we wait till he's here, because I'd like, of course, to hear his perspective as well. So Darrell, how did you even get into Agile? You are the Agile and innovation leader for the practice of Bain & Company worldwide, right? What attracted you in this? You could do, and you did retail. I know from your biography, right? And retail, well, they had to be Agile lately, I guess, but so how did you get into this?
I did, and that's actually how it happened. About 15 years ago, when I was leading Bain's retail practice, I started working on a concept we called omni-channel retailing. That is, how do you make the best of both digital and physical worlds in creating a really great experience for customers, that you shouldn't have just one or the other. There's got to be a way to bring them together. And as I was doing that, I started working with some very large retailers. And one of the things that I noticed is that some of the retailers that were moving the quickest towards this omni-channel retailing, they were doing something different largely in their technology departments that I didn't understand. And they were talking about sprints and backlogs and retrospectives, and I could not figure out what was going on, but I knew it was working in their technology departments. And I'm embarrassed to admit this now, but for a year or two, I said, look, I am not a technologist. I do not understand technology. I don't understand what they're talking about. It feels like this vocabulary is putting large stay away signs to me, to the non-technologists. So I brought in some of our technology folks and they said, oh yeah, they're talking about Agile. And I said, well, just translate that for me, please. I know it's important, but just translate it for me. And the more I started learning about Agile, the more I said, I can't just ignore this. I have to figure it out. So I started sitting with some of the teams in these large retailers and was watching how they were working these very small, autonomous, rapidly moving teams. It was so inspiring and they were having so much fun that I actually started learning about it and taking certification courses and reading books and learning all that. But the best way to learn was just sitting with these teams. And then the more I learned about Agile, the more I realized this is not a way of doing technology. This is a way of doing innovation. And if it works in technology, think about the other places in retail that need innovation, about marketing and new product development and innovating the supply chain. And my head just started spinning with all the opportunities for Agile inside retailers. And that's what I did. I started trying to figure out how to take it out of the technology department and into other parts of the organization. And then from there, from retailers to all different kinds of industries. And I just fell in love with it. I truly believe it is the way humans are designed to work. And so that's how I got started in it 10 or 15 years ago. And I've just continued to learn. It's for me, it's a little like fly fishing. You never really get good at it, but you just keep better and better and better at it. So lots of fun.
Well, I see a phone number here. Is this, I assume it's Michael.
This is me. This is me, Michael. I don't know what's happening, but I'm having some Zoom challenges today. So I will do the vocal and continue to troubleshoot.
Continue to troubleshoot, but okay, so maybe you missed out a little bit while you were troubleshooting and getting on the phone, but we just talked a little about how Darrell got involved into Agile and how it came really from the disruption that happens in retail, but which was your other kind of industry focus, right, of your tri-fold matrix in consulting. So that's kind of very cool. Yeah, Michael, tell us a little bit about, now we don't see you, but we hear you. Tell us a little bit about, you know, I mean, you had this incredible experience, I guess, at GM, right? In a time, you know, it's like GE in a way, right? I mean, there is a lot going on. It's a prominent company. They both have a general in their name. And, you know, they somehow were icons and, you know, GM falling much earlier from grace, but also GE falling from grace around now, reinventing itself. How was it at GM? And then maybe, Michael, a little bit about what you do at Amazon.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Roland. I think the starting point for Agile matters a lot. And I think I can compare and contrast just a bit General Motors from, you know, how Amazon was born and how Amazon, you know, acts as an Agile organization from its very inception. And I think that matters. I used to say when I was at General Motors, that, you know, I would think of organizations as a set of super tankers and speedboats. And the speedboats are where the organization needed to be agile. The speedboats were, you know, at General Motors, where we needed to invent, where we needed to move super fast in order to, you know, avoid being disrupted from the market. How do you compete against, you know, the Lyfts and the Ubers? How do you compete on the self-driving landscape? How do you compete in you know, against a Tesla, who from its very inception was an all-electric platform company? And in that case, it was really about how do you continue to push trucks out the back door because trucks make the money, and you need great durability and precision. And, you know, I think lean in particular is really important in running that core part of the business. continuing to incrementally get the best you can and add speed, but it's still fairly methodical. While these other activities, like how do you compete in the new mobility landscape or on the new mobility landscape, needed the speedboats on the edge. So I would think about it very, very differently than I do in a company that grew up that way. So General Motors, it was really about where do you need to be agile? At what points in the organization do you need to be agile, and how do you position those, simplistic, in a very simplistic manner, those speedboats for the greatest success? Like, how do you make those growth bets, and how do you operate as a startup in some of those new spaces? And you almost had to be semi-bimodal to be able to do that. And then eventually, these bets would become the new core. And I think you're seeing some of that at General Motors today. Now, I juxtaposition that with Amazon, and Amazon is absolutely agile. Amazon is nothing but a bunch of speedboats, thousands of them moving really fast. But there is an overarching set of principles, just like what you would have with agility, principles and values, culture, we would describe it, that keeps a set of coherence across those speedboats, so that there's some synergy, and it's not the same as a bunch of startups. There are synergies between them, and frankly, the level of sophistication in how that happens is quite remarkable. So that's how those are two very, very different comparisons, almost like on different edges of the continuum.
Yeah.
And I think starting point matters a whole lot.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I mentioned earlier, we have been working recently on a research project on business ecosystem leadership and how to, succeed in business ecosystems, and thinking that you're with Amazon Web Services now, right? I mean, that takes Agile even to a higher level, because you are one of the 800-pound gorilla enablers of agility, aren't you?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, AWS is all about agility, and the principles are true. You work backwards from the customer. You certainly are iterating and moving fast. Speed's disproportionately critical. So all those things are true for sure.
Because my question in this respect just comes to mind, if you're an enabler of agility, and an ecosystem efficiency or effectiveness obviously depends that each and every stakeholder of that system somehow, right, is a, let's say, mature or able participant. Are you doing anything to help companies in their own agility journey at Amazon Web Services?
I don't know that we would present it that way, but absolutely. That is the whole theory of working backwards from the customer and ensuring that the customers are not just getting the technology that they need, but the understanding of how to apply that technology, the partnerships necessary to enable that technology. So yeah, absolutely. That's all part of the overall delivery system and the way we go to market.
Peter, I mean, are you somehow been in touch with the cloud guys and what it does to your organization?
So Roland, this is the creation story, as Michael said, matters huge in terms of the way that Agile comes into the organization or manifests itself. One of the ways that we talk about it a little bit is that the boundaries between inside our organization, between functions inside the organization, and the boundaries between our organization and other organizations that we interact with have become porous, to say the least, and sometimes invisible. And I think one of the things that Agile helps us do is to recognize how we're coordinating all of these efforts, how we're enabling all of these efforts with a focus on execution, or a focus on delivering something that works to our customers. And when we moved to Boston, it was because we wanted to be out of the suburbs into engagement into the space that we were creating in Boston is space that is this formal / informal structure there where the good ideas happen. Like this is like where we think about the way that people think and do their work, and engage with maybe some more creative thinking on those activities, not just the regimented this or that or this as the operational objectives of a headquarters.
Right. Can you hear me?
Yes. And you have a very cool video, a very cool display on there.
My display is on dialogue. Zoom today obviously poses challenges to people. I called them yesterday, by the way. It was impossible to get any support or answer any questions because they're overwhelmed. You know, of course, with the explosion they had because of the COVID-19 situation. Well, I think we're agile and flexible even in these kind of respects, and just keep going. So, you know, maybe we focus a little bit more and drill a little bit more into the challenges really. And if it makes sense, let's really divide this into 3 dimensions: people, you know, kind of micro social processes, and macro organizational elements of agility. What do you see, you know, on the people side when we start? You know, what does it take really to you know, thrive in a context that needs agility and needs this flexibility? What does it take from people? Who wants to take a stab on that? Michael, you know, Darrell
I can dive in. Yeah,
exactly.
I'm glad to dive in.
Yeah.
Hopefully I'm going to have video. Hopefully I'll have video here soon enough, but I'll dive in.
I'm troubleshooting myself in the meantime. Okay, go ahead.
Of course, I think a lot about the people side. I'm in the talent space. That's my day job. That's where I reside. The way I think about this, and I'll try to answer it from both a micro and a macro perspective. First, on the micro side, you know, we tend to think that we need to get like super smart people inside of organizations, and that's absolutely true. Like, human capital is disproportionately critical to an organization, but the way you arrange those people and the way you get them positioned to leverage, like, it's not enough just to hire really smart people, train people, gain the experiences from people. You've also got to position those people so that that potential can be leveraged. Most of our organizations have, you know, just a ton of latent potential within them simply because of the way people are arranged. So I'm a social scientist by trade. So I think about that a lot as social capital. You know, human capital is what you know. Social capital is how well positioned you are to leverage what you know. And I think it's critical to Agile that the way we arrange people, you know, at Amazon we describe our, you know, small little teams, you know, sort of the Scrum methodology that we use. We use them in 2 pizza teams. Small teams, you know, 6 coders, could even be outside of coding, and those small groups are, you know, they can move up to 10x faster, just based on the way they're arranged. And it's a critical configuration of experts that can complement one another, so that dependencies are removed, and they can operate as a semi-autonomous speedboat to get stuff done. So I think at the micro level, especially in the development side of Agile, so not where ideas come from, but how do you get those ideas built and out into the world, you know, having super cohesive small teams that can move really, really fast, and then having, I won't talk about macro right now, but, you know, and then having the macro components, which is threading those teams together, is really, really essential. So I think this people dimension is only really beginning to get the attention that it needs as it relates to Agile. And certainly, you know, I know, Darrell, you've done a lot of work on that front. But I think it's, for me, it's as much about the social arrangements and how you connect people as it is about what you teach the people and the, you know, the human capital traits of those individuals.
And I'll get to you in a minute, but Michael, you are already talking about a little bit the social element of agility. isn't there something that you also have people, you know, if they're not curious, if they're not able to collaborate? There was some, I think we did this idea or somewhere way back, or at the design school at Stanford, said, don't, you know, be an asshole is the main criteria for hiring, right? So what do you do if you have a lot of assholes? And obviously you put them all together in great teams, and that's the next step, right? So having a swarm type or two pizza type of things is already for me a social architecture, but there is also something in, you know, people, even deeper in the individual level. I know the individual is a construct; it doesn't exist independent from social contexts, but still, anything to that, to the people, and we'll get to the squads or swarms or where we'll in a minute, I guess. But anything to people.
I mean, I think of people in two. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, it's fine.
Yeah, I think, you know, and nobody wants to work with assholes, so let's go there, right, from the very beginning. I mean, that's you know, people that are always thwarting and challenging your idea is problematic because you don't get liftoff. But actually, those people do. Let's not call them assholes, but let's say challengers. Actually, you know, challenging late in the process, like after you have built something. You know, after you have built a new service, after you know, have really stood something up, you know, in some respects, you could even argue that retrospectives are about challenging the process. And so later in the process, I think challengers matter a lot, because a person who can challenge, you know, that we'll call them the devil's advocate for a moment. But earlier in the process, you kind of want the high energy believers, the people that believe we can do this. Because it takes that amount of energy to get liftoff. So it's, you know, just like social arrangements, how you stage, you know, the different dimensions of human capital in the evolution of standing something up matters a lot as well.
Guys, just jump in, please.
Sorry, just a couple of thoughts. One is, I love what Michael was saying about latent potential. Because one of the most interesting things to me about this terrible COVID pandemic is how it has unleashed innovation inside so many companies. And there are a lot of companies that have said in the past, oh, we'll never be able to do Agile until we restructure our entire organization, until we bring in a whole new group of talent. We'll never be able to do it. Well, guess what? We're finding all sorts of companies being Agile over just a few months by not restructuring the organization, but just letting the organization work the way they naturally want to work, by stopping some silly things and bureaucratic processes that aren't necessary and taking the things that matter most and elevating them and giving people the autonomy, the right to be able to provide greater input to what they're seeing with their customers and their suppliers and their line operators. And the most common conversation that I'm having with executives these days is, my goodness, we've sort of stumbled into agility accidentally, but how do we turn this sporadic innovation that we're seeing into systematic innovation and bottle this up and make our organization do this perhaps on a less exhausting way? So let's make it more sustainable for people. But I love the way we're operating. How do we keep doing that? And I think we're learning some very valuable lessons about, you know what, people inside the organization, there are corporate MacGyvers inside a whole bunch of those kinds of people that are just dying to innovate. And when they're innovating, they're happier, they feel more relevant. So I love what Michael was saying. And I think that for an organization to really become Agile, yes, we need these Agile methods or these Agile practices inside Agile teams. And maybe it'll only be, who knows, 20% of the organization that's actually working in Agile teams on a day-to-day basis. But throughout the organization, we need these Agile mindsets. We need these values and principles that say all of us can have a customer obsession, because all work should have a customer. all work. Our finance department has a customer, the internal users who are doing it. And I love that about Amazon, frankly, is that they really have become to understand that every piece of work has a customer. And there's every reason to believe that we can operate effectively by respecting individuals and the power of diversity, and that everyone in the organization can contribute innovative ideas, and we can maintain a sustainable pace. So I love that these agile values and principles, we're finding that they can take hold inside even some of the stodgiest, even some of the oldest and slowest moving organizations, as long as necessity, the mother of invention, is driving it. How do we keep that attitude going?
That's so right, Darrell. I mean, just from a standpoint of like understanding that need generates something, and particularly where we have a situation that has never happened before, it's created people to think differently about what the potential solutions could be in terms of learning. And when we think about that individual person inside the agile organization or adjacent to the agile organization, it really is, do they have the psychological safety to be able to bring up the challenges that they see? And if they do, are they the asshole or are they the challenger? Like, are they, like, how are they doing that? Is the how becomes really important. And like the later it is in the process, maybe that more valuable challenge is, but it's also more problematic for the team that has been working with this person or individual throughout the time, and they just come up with it at the end. You know, it's like, you couldn't have told us that like 2 months ago. You know, imagine the frustration on that. So I think that, so what I would say is like our biggest thing is where people see the need, they find a solution. And that's really, as we think about generating an agile mindset, generating the agile teams, it is really about creating the need. It's about adult learning principles.
I say nothing. I mean, does it? Okay, then I say something. Let's just go then one step further. So Michael, you alluded already, right? I mean, I know a little bit, for instance, Daimler, they had this swarms principle, right? Which was also bringing together people from different functions, and they collaborate across boundaries. And, you know, they have certain rules, and then you have these famous agile kind of roles, like, I don't know, pacemakers and, you know, agile leaders and so on and so forth. Let's talk a little bit about that. I feel sometimes that, you know, everybody is a scrum master and what have you, and it has been agile, more or less almost, this is agile. You know, you do these kind of design thinking workshops, and they're very much fluff, in my humble opinion, you know, if they don't really reach the core. So maybe something to that, how need they to be designed in a way that really, you know, they connect with the core? Any thoughts on that? Michael, you have to unmute. I can unmute you. Ask to unmute. Were you already again in a...
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Through the computer? Okay, is that good enough? Sorry, I'm having all kinds of tech challenges today, guys.
With Amazon.
I'm trying to... Yeah, I know, and this is I think this is my local server issue. But anyhow, I think the formal roles and all that are really, really good to build training and to get people to help them understand exactly what it means to be agile and what the methodologies are, how to think about the principles. But actually, where I've seen this work best is where it's literally dispersed across the organization. So I just to go back a little bit about the design thinking comment, I think design thinking has a very limited capability, and I've spent a lot of time inside the D schools, so I'm a very strong advocate of design thinking. I think design thinking is great on the front end of the innovation curve. It's really good for discovery. Like you could have agile, and then I'll get to the roles in a second. You could have agile and move really, really fast and iterate. But if you really aren't discovering like what's possible, if you aren't, building bridges and looking out. You're an insular company and all you're doing is moving faster and comparing yourself to yourself. I think design thinking actually helps to break down insularity inside of an organization. So I think the combination of linking some of these methods together in a very deliberate way, and maybe that means you've got a scrum master, maybe you've got a design thinking coach, and I think that's useful. But at the end of the day, it's really about bringing the core of the business to a new reality. And so for me, those roles matter, those methods matter for sure. But at the end of the day, like where I got the most lift at General Motors in particular was getting the senior leaders, getting those influencing engineers, the chief engineers, getting them engaged in the process and actually creating almost this moment of enlightenment. Like I can't tell you how many times I was personally challenged by some of these folks saying, we've been doing this for 100 years, or I've been doing this for 25 years. And then I would just say, well, let's just go out and visit, a city, and let's go look at how mobility is, how mobility solutions are deployed today. And let's just go study what's different in the human today versus, 20 years ago when we last did. And almost always what would happen is people would come back with this epiphany. And it could be, junior engineers, senior engineer, it didn't matter. But what I really want to do is start to break that paradigm. So I think what's most important for the core is to get them engaged in the work, to let them see the difference, to, put them into, the flow of an agile, again, if it's a scrum or if it's a stand-up, and getting them out into the markets to see the customer, to realize what could be different. And I think that those epiphany moments are what really help to catalyze change at a broader level. So otherwise, you've got small, isolated pockets, I tend to call them entrepreneurial pockets, that are doing Agile really, really well, but you're not linking those things up in such a way that you can get the momentum and the impact to scale ideas and frankly, to get new ideas and new products invested in. So I think it takes a combination of these moves. And that requires some degree of sponsorship, but it's not sponsorship from a high and saying, this is what we will do. It's got to be at a ground level in regards to people engaging and having those epiphany moments themselves. At least that's been my experience.
Yeah, just to build on that, Michael, I love what you're saying, and I believe wholeheartedly that Agile is not going to make a bit of difference in an organization until it affects the core. And I think for a long time, there was a sense that the only way to create kind of this ambidextrous organization is the bureaucracy will kill people. So what you have to do is to take these Agile teams and greenhouse them, separate them from the rest of the organization, use skunk works. And what we've seen is that doesn't work. And it doesn't work for two reasons. If you think about the innovation process, we think of it as a cycle where there's the discover part of it, of how do you understand what the customer needs are and how to address them. And there's the design part of it, of what could we do about helping those customers to achieve their needs. And then there's the develop part of it, where you are building prototypes, and the only way to build those prototypes is with operations, and then eventually you have to deliver it. And the biggest problems that we see with innovation is both at the front end and the back end. That is, we know 70 to 90% of innovations tend to fail. First of all, because we're designing to specifications that aren't really what customers want. Somebody inside the organization decided, oh, well, this is what we should develop. So they designed specifications. And it turns out that 2/3 of the time, those specifications are wrong. That by the time we actually turn out a product 2 years from now, that's not what the customer was looking for. The second problem that we have is that a team goes off and they develop something that the core says, this is not economical. It may be a brilliant innovation, but we can't produce that. We can't make a profit at it. And so they don't adopt and scale it inside the organization. And so what we say the key to success is that you have to run the business efficiently. you have to change the business effectively, and you have to create a way to harmonize those two parts of the business so that they work together. They are not enemies. They tend to think of each other as enemies, but in a yin and yang sense, they are actually mutually beneficial activities that need each other in order to be able to succeed. And the trick is teaching both sides of the organization how to do that and letting the core see, we need your ideas. We have to understand from you how operations work, how customers work, how the business processes work. We need you engaged in teams. And so these cross-functional agile teams, they're bringing operations into the teams, these experts into the teams. They may work together for 12 months, 18 months, 24 months. Then they go back to their departments and they say, let me tell you what I've learned. Let me show you how this can work. And it spreads through the organization in a very organic, natural way, as opposed to the traditional way of, oh, we're going to launch a program. We're going to have this huge program management office. We're going to have our stoplight charts and our Gantt charts, and we're just going to drive this through the organization. No, that's not going to create the cultural and the leadership and the change and the harmonization of these businesses that's needed to succeed. I think that's been the problem with ambidextrous organizations for decades. We've always known we need to do both of these. No one's been able to figure out how to do it. I think Agile teaches people how to do it.
One thing that we've done is to create mission-based teams relative to, it is a mission-based agile team for a specific purpose, for a specific activity that is customer focused or customer facing. And when you have that mission-based team, you are pulling in the multiple different functions. You're pulling in, a methodology, in many cases, agile methodology, in some cases other ones, but but this idea of the cross-fertilization across the organization is really important. Really important.
Yeah, I think this is like such a critical part of this conversation. In my view, it's this concept of spread and diffusion, or scaling, if you prefer to call it that. Whatever language you put behind this, the academic literature says that developed inside of an isolated team is 43% more likely to be rejected by the antibodies outside of that group. So a lot of work's been done up at Harvard to study this from a social dynamic standpoint, and it's these bridge connections that really are the antidote to that. So if you can, I think it was just exactly what you just said, Peter, like bringing people back together and spreading them out. It's these bridge connections that actually, in our research suggests, can give you a 4x lift on your ideas. So it can get these ideas out of these small entrepreneurial pockets or agile teams. It can lift them up and actually engage other people in the co-creation process. I think there may, at least in my thinking and research and model, is there's something between development and delivery called diffusion. And that is like, how do I get these ideas from minimum viable product lifted up and supported, because they got to get finance, they got to get marketing support, they've got to get budgeting support, they got to get leadership, they got to hit all the formal parts of the business. And what we have found is that if you can build the right bridges, what you're able to do is close the network in on these other groups, and you'll get as much as a 4x lift in this diffusion or scaling component of Agile. And I couldn't agree anymore, Darrell. Like that is the part that people haven't talked nearly enough about. And we know how to bring ideas into the world. We know how to do the minimum viable product, but how do we get the support from the formal structures so that we can get them funded and then ultimately delivered tends to be the piece that hinders most organizations I at least have been part of and or have researched. I'll give you one last, sorry, I can get a little bit passionate about this topic. One anecdote, and I spent about 10 years doing some research for Adaptive Space, and we were going out and we were looking at all kinds of different large companies. And there was one company in particular that was a medical devices facility. I won't name the company by name, but there was a small, this gets very much to like the skunk works, Darrell, that you were talking about. There was a small team of about 35 engineers, R&D, PhD, research scientists, and design thinkers. They were doing everything by the book. Like any one of us would have walked in and said, wow, that is a phenomenal, fascinating lab with big, bold concepts. And they had a commercial hit rate of 0 across 3 years. So like any management firm, right, if you're not producing, you know, you're not going to stick around for very long. So management made a decision to disperse this team. Good news was they had great human capital, so other people wanted them. They dispersed them across the business. Within the next year, they had they were in like phase 3 of design with 3 big commercial products. One was already released, and the other 2 have progressed significantly. And the only thing that really changed, same ideas they were working on, by the way, in the core, the only thing that had changed was the influencing point of these 35 people were now out with all the other groups where they have bridge connections to be able to scale these ideas. And they literally, this team, the funny story is they would meet at Starbucks in the evening and they would continue to iterate on their ideas, and then they would go do their day job by day, and they were influencing at different points. And all of a sudden these ideas started to pop all over the place.
I mean, I know also that, Michael, you do some work with Rob Cross, right? Who is a friend kind of, because we do similar work. And when you talk about network analytics, you know, and these bridge kind of things and these weak connections, actually, it's multiple membership in teams, so to say, multiple membership in tribes that is able to do these kind of connections. Right. So one of the issues is that usually in groups you look more inward, right, than across. And unfortunately, you know, you become a trader almost of your group if you work with other groups. So you know, in principle. So somebody said once, an organization is an organized system of traders, right? And eventually, if you look at a larger organization, if you work with a customer, you're the biggest trader, right? Because, oh my God, you know, customer has really a different interest maybe than my organization, or that could be at least a perspective. So I wonder, you know, these bridges, do they come serendipitous because great people act as bridges or as nodes, or can you design them? And if you design them, how do you design them? And the question remains for me, how you design them in the ecosystem. Because one thing is your core, let's say within your own organization, which you might still able to command and control in some way. You have design, you know, kind of authority as a senior team, at least in a limited way, but you have that design authority. You do not have that easily, that design authority, if you work in an ecosystem without having formal control or command. So just wonder how you design that in the place where you don't have the authority to design.
Well, I think, again, it's like a tale of two cities. If you grew up biologically as an organization and you instill this principle in people that they can navigate anywhere across the organization and ideas can come from anywhere, you know, that's one model. And I would say that's the more, you know, contemporary tech model of how this happens. You know, bridges happen in Amazon naturally. People go and they seek out ideas, then anyone, no matter where you sit inside the organization, can be the next, you know, sort of originator of the next big idea. And you can go, you know, go mine it across the org. In a more traditional organization, this is where talent management actually plays a big role. I think we need to be super deliberate about taking, and I'll give you a little bit of research and then one anecdote, and I promise to be short on this. You know, Ron Burt, who's done a lot of research in the network science space, along with Rob Krauss, suggests that these brokers, which are bridge people, these brokers are worth about 3x that of the average person. They tend to get more visibility, they tend to be promoted sooner, they tend to get paid more, all those sorts of things. And they also create more ideas, more insights. So, but if you oscillate back and forth between what we call central connectors, which is that person right in the center of that two pizza team that has great cohesion and trust with a small group of people, to a bridge person, which means you can share across many ideas or many teams, and then back to, you know, this two pizza team or this small, if you oscillate back and forth across your career, in other words, you go from central connector to bridge person, you know, your value to the organization is really radically improved, almost 2 to 3-fold, depending on which study you look at. So you can move people back and forth. And in fact, it's both a great thing from a career standpoint for people because they go broad and deep, but it's more important for the organization because what you're doing is you're building the social fabric, much like in that organizational study I shared a few moments ago with the medical devices company. You're building that fabric to where ideas spread more readily across pockets. And if you were in a group, you still have trust. It may be that you've lost some trust because you become them, you know, versus you're no longer us, but you still have more trust than the rest of them do. So your ability to continue to communicate and coordinate to and from groups is still enhanced. So what we're finding in the social literature is that oscillation back and forth between central connector and bridge person is really critical to this scaling component of the innovation model.
And I'd be interested in Peter's experience with this as well, but one of the things that I have noticed is, unfortunately, you know, the book I just released is called Doing Agile Right, and we called it Doing Agile Right because so many people are doing Agile wrong. By that I mean Agile is just a tool. Agile is just a way of helping the strategy to work. And too often we see Agile language, but being used incorrectly by a bureaucrat who by Agile means doing what I say faster than before. And that's not Agile. You know, you have to create a system in order to overcome that, because systems will beat individuals every day of the week. And so one of the things that I love about Agile is, number one, that it increases the transparency of work across the organization, that anybody should be able to see what an Agile team is working on at any time, when they're going to deliver, what they're going to deliver. And so as opposed to, Agile sort of has this image of, you know, like a skunk workie that you just send it off site and nobody knows what's going on. Agile is just the opposite of that. No, we want everybody to look at what we're doing and to contribute ideas to it and to be able to improve it, to know when it's going to come out, how we're going to introduce it. So I think building a system, much like Michael was talking about, that is a part of how do we do planning, how do we do budgeting, how do we do reviewing, how do we do it in fast feedback loops. A lot of people and bureaucrats will use these sprints, these short intervals, in order to try to get people to work harder, to work faster, to just burn out. It sounds like a sprint as opposed to a marathon. That is just the opposite of what they should be, because the only reason for shortening the intervals is to do things in smaller batches so we can review them with our customers more regularly. It forces us to do prototypes. That's the purpose of a sprint, and to help the team to be able to see regular, frequent wins every couple of days or weeks, because the ability to show progress, win after win after win, customer loving it, that's what it's about. And you have to build, if you don't build a system to do it, the existing bureaucracy will kill any team,
You're Darrell, you're exactly correct. I mean, this mindset, this thought process of driving outside of the culture that you're in, something different, and saying, oh, it's going to work because Agile is really good, and that the culture is going to support it because it supports the customer. Like, it really has to be thoughtfully implemented at a team basis, but then how those teams interact. And so that's really, I think, the connection. If the culture isn't going to support it, you have to create a culture or enable a culture that will support it, that actually recognizes the value of the individual and their own experience in developing that. And it isn't about burnout. It isn't about, you need resilience, you need it every day. It's like, no, you should need resilience at some point in your career, but not every day. And I think that's the piece where we would say we are really focused on how that happens broadly, but then at a very individual focus for those individuals.
Okay, guys, I mean, we've been talking almost an hour, and, you know, probably we could go on forever just among us. Somebody, you know, said it's just 4 men when they saw the picture, right? And criticized that. So I thought we can bring in somebody from the audience, right, to an empty chair, what we usually do in these roundtables for the last, you know, 20 minutes or so.
Great.
And I was wondering, I just saw that Janine is in the audience. Janine, would you be willing just to, you know, say what you think about it? Should I just call on you? I think that. So I give you, I promote you to panelist. And what else do I do with you? Let's see. Oh, here she is. So I can give you video. Oops. Us to start video. Here you go. To introduce Janine, Janine runs the, you have to unmute yourself then, right? Otherwise we can't hear you, your charming laugh. Janine runs for ThyssenKrupp, you know, a company that also is in interesting waters these days. The corporate university, or the ThyssenKrupp Academy. Janine, introduce yourself real quick, and maybe what's your opinion on the whole thing, and what do you take away from these conversations?
Yeah, hi, I'm Janine Schwartau. Like Roland said, I've been running the ThyssenKrupp Academy for the past, I guess I started it with a team 12 years ago, and I've been leading it for, I guess, the last 8 years or so. I've actually been fascinated by what these 4 men have been saying. I've been taking a lot of notes. And I actually wish I could add something of value, but I really, you've been describing what we've been seeing a lot in my company, where there are pockets of agile organizations and places that are working very good in an agile way. There are places that are working in a very good lean way. We're thinking a lot about how to scale that. So scaling is actually the big topic for us. So yeah, I've been listening to what you've been saying, and I think there have been great ideas. Quite fascinating. I wish I could add something that goes beyond that, but I.
Haven't you designed some stuff for ThyssenKrupp as well that was at least, you know, from the idea something you want to be agile? And maybe, I don't know if everybody knows ThyssenKrupp, maybe you quickly say about the company, how big they are, what they do.
Yeah, we're a conglomerate, an industrial conglomerate, 160,000 people, 5 business areas, much more businesses than that. So it's diverse, like a GE, I would say, like a Siemens. I think we have the same challenges. I could relate a lot to what Peter has been saying about being a huge company and yeah, trying to get these things. We do have where agile is a big issue for us at the moment, but still, like I say, it's working very good in some pockets of the organization, and it's and there's a lot of areas that are still, you know, quite conservative. It's in that I think it's so fundamental. It's not just starting to work differently, but it's also looking at the whole setup of the organization and the whole mindset of the organization. And that's, I don't know, it's a huge change. And even lean for us has not been implemented in that broad way as it could have been. I don't know, we haven't had a push, like, for example, Peter, you've been saying your CEO is really driving the issue. it's something that that in terms of our challenges, we have huge challenges at the moment, financial challenges, business challenges, the challenges that everybody has on top. I think it's pretty much some of the only answers at this moment. And yet it feels like people don't have the time to think about organizational capabilities in that sense at the moment. It's all around fast cost savings, and that's not making it easier to fundamentally change mindsets and ways of working inside a company like this. But that's I think we're in an extreme situation right now as a company.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, Darrell, go ahead. And we might bring in maybe even one more. I see a few, maybe Matthew from, he's now with Novartis, used to be in Shell. Matthew, right, if you're willing to say something, right into the message, yes or something. Okay, Darrell, you wanted to.
Well, just one thing as I listen to Janine, and I love her thoughts, I think we're at an interesting time in the history of the world and hopefully business as well, where historically the expectation of a leader is, and how a leader adds the most value to the organization, is a notion that what leaders are supposed to do is to be prophetic. That is, my job as a leader is to predict and to command and to control. The way that I create value for my organization is that I see the future more clearly than anybody else in the organization, because I am, after all, a genius. And my job is to see that future, predict it, command the organization to adhere to this vision of the future, and then create layer upon layer upon layer to supervise people and make sure that I control them so that they will follow my commands and they will achieve my vision. That's wrong. That's bad. And I hope one of the things that we're getting ready to learn is there's a reason that some organizations get 40% more productivity out of their people than those predict and command and control organizations do. And that's not a made up number, 40%, by testing, unleashing, coaching, bringing the potential out of people. We all have a tendency, sadly, to hire and to mentor and reward people who think and act like we do. That's terrible, because what we need in an organization is people who think differently than we do. That's the only way. Otherwise, we only need one of us. The only reason that we're going to get value out of people is, what are the differences and how do I as a leader unleash this potential? And I hope that we're on the verge of understanding that people in an organization have far more potential than we have ever realized. Far more potential than we've ever realized. And that a true leader is not going to suppress that, not going to turn them into robots who do what a leader wants them to do, but to tap that untapped potential, unleash it, and if you can get 40% greater productivity out of 1,000 people, out of 10,000 people, out of 100,000 people, think what you can do to the adaptability, to the future of success of a business. I think the role of a leader should be changing fundamentally.
That was a very, very, really good point to make here, Darrell. And, you know, I thought I'd bring in you, Matthew. I don't know if you know Matthew, Jacob. Matthew, you just moved from Shell to Novartis, right?
Yes,
and maybe
I'm sitting at my desk in Basel.
Oh, well.
So it's a bit of a move from Houston with Shell.
Maybe a few words, and you know, we know each other because Matthew was very kindly involved first in the digital transformation project we did, and now most recently in the business ecosystem project, also in our advisory board. And so maybe Matthew, a little bit, how does this relate to you? And tell us just 2 words about.
Well, so first of all, I cannot talk for Novartis. I've been here just a couple of weeks, but like the company's at an
Not Shell.
extremely exciting time. And I can just say that the CEO, Vas, is trying to drive a culture in the company around 3 values: unbossed, curious, and inspired. And it's unbelievable what it's doing to the company. But if you wanted to define a culture to drive Agile, I think it's those 3: unbossed, curious, and inspired. And just a quick story in terms of, one of the pieces of work I did when I was at Shell was to help us set up the digitalization initiative in Shell. And we were doing some absolutely incredible work. Just on something like predictive analytics for maintenance, we were able to demonstrate something like a $6 billion, that's a B, dollar saving. And yet when it came into execution, we had exactly the problem that you all talked about, which is that the system was not part of designing this. The IT platform we used, just Slack and a lot of, duct tape based software, was not going to work on the IT system. And despite the size of the prize, the level of resistance from the system was just unbelievable. And that was one fascinating sort of learning from that. The second learning I can share perhaps from that process is how when the bureaucracy adopted Agile, you had language, but not the substance. So everything became a sprint. We're just going to learn our way into it. It almost became an excuse for sort of sloppy thinking and sloppy work versus the discipline that Agile requires, right? It's incredibly disciplined. And the sort of last thing I'd say is one of the things I did, one of the sort of legacies I left at the company was to look at our change methodology, which was a classic consultant methodology with 5 phases and 4 work streams, and said, what if we actually took Agile and design thinking and built a change methodology that focused on the human experience and did this in an Agile way? It was completely based on experimentation. And it's caught on like wildfire, even in the bureaucracy. So there's something about even touching core systems with these ideas in ways that are palatable, that just releases extraordinary support and energy. 3 quick thoughts, Roland.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Michael, you're laughing or smiling on what he said.
There's so much rattling around in my mind about where I would like to go. And I just think this whole concept of change, traditional change methodologies, it's so obsolete. And so I love that you're reinventing change methodologies and trying to think about how that isn't just one massive change protocol like Cure to 5 phases, but you're thinking about, when do you use design thinking? When do you use Agile? And I think this is the essence of leadership. So I couldn't agree more with what Darrell was just saying about leadership needs to be reinvented. Management needs to be reinvented. And I think, the role of a leader is not to be, the sage on the stage, standing out in front of an organization, sort of imparting this wisdom. That's an impossibility. I think I study leadership as much as anything, and the reality is, I think the role of leadership is I think of the metaphor is the leader stands, on the brim of a container called the organization, and they're always watching what's happening, or we as leaders, so it's not one, but many. And we're trying to figure out what the organization needs next. So I think it combines with this, this notion of change. Traditional change is wrong. It's not linear. At times an organization needs to go outside and discover. At other times they need to move faster. And I think the role of a leader is to almost intuit what the organization needs next, and to mostly hold open different containers. I obviously have a very strong social bias, as you've seen the whole way through this conversation, but different containers to enact different activities, like at times discover, at times bring new product into the world, at times scale those products. And I think the role of a leader is much less about being the visionary and much more about just facilitating different types of connections and different types of activities within an organization based on what the customer needs in any moment, what the world needs, I mean, we've learned a lot about this, right? And we've learned a lot about agility, through this whole experience with COVID. There are many companies that pivoted and stepped right into this time and are continuing to prosper. There are others that haven't been able to do. Some of those just the nature of the business, but some of that is the nature of how leaders have led during this time. So I think we're at this like really fascinating period of time in thinking about how leaders enable agility and or stifle it. And there's a lot of that as well.
Somebody wrote into the chat here, and I think it was to Matthew, but it relates to what you just said, Michael, right? I mean, COVID, that if a low oil price, right, would for a long time forces you to become more, kind of innovative and agile. So, and that's related to your Shell experience, Matthew. But I guess, and I want to come back to that. The organizations do not operate in the vacuum, right? They are part of a system of stakeholders, customers, the suppliers, the regulators, and so on and so forth, competitors, of course, and innovation ecosystems that they're working with, and what have you. The architect, you need to engage with those and to leverage these boundaries, right? Which is nothing else than leverage actually the bridges that you mentioned before, just on the kind of more elevated systems level. Is this something also that you can design for? And I mean, there is co-creation initiatives with customers. There's all kinds of stuff going on in that way. But I feel sometimes not enough thought, in social science, organizational science has been given to that larger type of, enabling agility for a larger system. Any thoughts on that? And we have to wrap up soon, but I just wanted to get that in as well.
Yeah, Roland, I'll just jump in and say something. I mean, first of all, there was a very old school of org design which sort of fell out of fashion after a point, but did some game-changing work called socio-technical systems design.
Yeah, right.
I think, given what's going on today, there's an incredible opportunity to relook at that space. And I've been thinking a lot about it and looking at some work. There's wonderful work being done by Susan Morman and others at USC on this, of how do you take sort of socio-technical systems design, which is what you see in Lean, what you see in Agile. It's basically the same concept, and the sort of centrality of technology in the midst of all of that. How do you use that to sort of unleash human potential? I mean, that's what socio-technical systems try to do. I mean, the early experiments with autonomous teams and so on in the 50s and 60s came out of there. I think there's a great, and that was a pretty rigorous organization design methodology that somehow with time, with the 60s and 70s, all of it, OD got pretty fluffy with whatever people were smoking. But I think there's a time to sort of return back to some of these core essentials of what it takes to build great socio-technical systems. And Amazon does that perfectly. So you think of, Bezos's 14 rules on one hand, or his principles, which defines how the social system works, and the two pizza teams and the technology just coming together in wonderful ways.
I mean, we got to wrap up soon. I mean, how do you like the conversation? Peter, Janine, Michael, Darrell, what are you taking out of it? Is there something? Janine, you've been there from the very beginning.
Yeah. I think it's been very inspiring. I took a lot of ideas out of it. I think in the end, I think it's every business, and actually every part of the business has to find its own way of what agile means to them, and how to combine the potential methods that there are, to make it to the best use of your own business. Because after all, we're not all software developers, and we're not all automobile producers. There's I think a lot that can be taken from it, and I think it's up to every pocket of the business and the people in it to find out what works best for them. And I think it's our job as learning organizations to inspire that thinking and to get this process going in terms of the thinking. But it's a fascinating issue, and I think there's a lot to learn still for me as well. Yeah.
I think the big power, and to springboard off what you just said, is like the big power is when you can enable people inside the organization to solve their own challenges as a leader, as an organization inside the ecosystem, then I think you've actually started to move the needle. And I think Agile does that. I think there are other ways to do that too, depending on the organizational structure. But this idea of how to unleash the people inside the organization is a key element of what I'm taking away from this conversation.
I'll just add, go ahead.
Michael, go.
I'll just add, this is how people want to work. I think the genie has left the bottle. It's going to be hard to put it back in. This is how people want to work. And I think we could talk about the way an organization organizes and orchestrates this, but I think over time, over the next few years, people are going to demand this. This is what people expect out of a company. People want to. We tend to say at Amazon we hire owner builders. People want to come join us because they want to build something and they want to own what they build. And I think that's the way people want to operate in the world. And I think as more and more organizations offer that possibility to them, those that are laggards on that scale are going to find it incredibly difficult to get the folks that really want to work in this new way, which I think is the predominance. Once people get a taste of this is the way to work, there's no going back. If your company snaps back to the way it was before, they're going to go someplace else where they can do what they want to do. And I think that's what's beginning to evolve. So I'm super long on these principles. And I just think this is going to be the new way that we work, with more and more nuances being discovered along the way.
Darrell. I mean, Darrell, you've been on the road a lot, also with your new book and stuff. I mean, how does this conversation compare?
This is a more enlightened conversation than I've had with many people. You've assembled a wonderful group. I especially love the people you added into the discussion, and I just couldn't agree more with them. I love what Janine was saying about organizations are complex systems, and complex systems are different for every organization. I find it ironic how many companies are trying to build an agile system in bureaucratic ways. What sense does that make to say we really want an agile organization, so let's use bureaucratic processes to create it? It doesn't make any sense. They are complex systems. Use agile principles and practices to create an agile system. It's the only way you're going to get there. And I do believe that we'll unleash extraordinary potential, but we have to recognize that organizations are very complex systems. You can't just copycat what you saw somebody else do and say, oh, well, so Spotify has these organization structures and we want to be like Spotify, so let's do that. It doesn't work. It's like organ transplants. You can't take pieces out of it and just put it into another person's system. You have to use agile principles and practices to create an agile system.
Well, maybe we use this as a closing statement, because I think we could go on forever, right? I mean, it's a fascinating topic, and it links, of course, to many, many other things, because it's very fundamental, to the overall workings and just the life of an organization. And anyway, so I want to thank everybody, of course, for taking the time and being here. We have actually recorded that. We're going to distribute this, also the recording, to everybody who has registered. We have still 80 people almost in the call. So after an hour and 15, that's pretty impressive, I think. At some point, we had about 120 of the registrants here. Yeah, whom I also want to thank for their patience and listening to us. Yeah, guys, agility, we're going to also summarize a little bit the highlights of this, get you a documentation of this, and I just want to thank everybody for being here.
What an honor. Thank you for having us.
Thanks, Roland.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Great
everyone.
discussion.
Okay, great, guys. So you have a great day wherever you are, Basel, Germany, you know, East Coast, West Coast, and so on and so forth. And be in touch. Okay, we'll be in touch. Okay, thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Okay, bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Organization. So let's use bureaucratic processes to create it. It doesn't make any sense. They are complex systems. Use agile principles and practices to create an agile system. It's the only way you're going to get there. And I do believe that we'll unleash extraordinary potential, but we have to recognize that organizations are very complex systems. You can't just copycat what you saw somebody else do and say, oh, well, so Spotify has these organization structures and we want to be like Spotify, so let's do that. It doesn't work. It's like organ transplants. You can't take pieces out of it and just put it into another person's system. You have to use agile principles and practices to create an agile system.
Well, maybe we use this as a closing statement, because I think we could go on forever, right? I mean, it's a fascinating topic, and it links, of course, to many, many other things, because it's very fundamental, you know, to the overall workings and just the life of an organization. Anyway, so I want to thank everybody, of course, for taking the time and being here. We have actually recorded that. We're going to distribute this, also the recording, to everybody who has registered. We have still 80 people almost in the call. So after an hour and 15, that's pretty impressive, I think. At some point, we had about 120 of the registrants here. Yeah, whom I also want to thank for their patience and listening to us. Yeah, guys, agility, we're going to also summarize a little bit the highlights of this, get you a documentation of this, and I just want to thank everybody for being here.
What an honor. Thank you for having us.
Thanks, Roland.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Great
everyone.
discussion.
Bye.
Okay, great, guys. So you have a great day wherever you
Bye.
are, Basel, Germany, you know, East Coast, West Coast, and so on and so forth. And be in touch. Okay, we'll be in touch. Okay, thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Okay, bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.